Welcome to Quilter's Architect. My name is Mark. This is part 4 of a sew-along about the quilt pattern Astro Journey. This is a free downloadable quilt pattern. You can follow the link in the description of this video to get a copy of the quilt pattern. I hope you're sewing along with me with this pattern. The last video I worked on making the eccentric star blocks. In this video, I'm going to continue with the hunter's star, and we have to make 16 of these hunter stars. Looking at the instructions on page 6, we have to make 64 HSTs of 3 different fabric combinations. It's fabrics O and Y, O and T, and T and Y. I have that fabric laid out here, and from my fabric that I selected, you can see that we have black, yellow, and white fabrics for these blocks. If we look on our cutting instructions on page 2, we can see that fabric O is black 3 1/4 inch squares, and fabric T is the white 3 1/4 inch squares. Fabric Y is the gold, or in my case, yellow 3 1/4 inch squares. In the appendix of the pattern, there's appendix page HST. It lays out the instructions for making HSTs. One of the first things we need to do, which I have already done part of that, is to draw a line from corner to corner. This is the line we're going to use to sew on each side of that 1/4 inch when we put 2 pieces of fabric together to make an HST, and then we sew on both sides of the line. Then we'll cut that line and we'll end up with 2 HSTs from those 2 pieces of fabric. And so the other thing that I find helpful for me, you may not need to do this, but in the case of my black fabric, it has a spatter pattern on the black. You can see it a little bit on the back. I don't want to make the mistake of turning the fabric the wrong way. Normally if it was black, this wouldn't be an issue, but it's not a solid black. And so I went ahead and flipped all these over face up. I have all the ones that have lines drawn on them face down. And so that way I can just go ahead and go through and chain piece all the HSTs. We're going to make 64 of the black and yellow, 64 of the black and white, and 64 of the white and yellow. Time to get started sewing some HSTs. Get these over here to make it a little bit easier to access while I'm working. Okay, so I've sewn down one side of the line with my HSTs, and I have my stack here of 64 times 3. What would that be? 192 HSTs. And I'm going to try what Sherry said. She said just instead of cutting these, which doesn't make a lot of sense, just leave them together and go back through down the other side of the line. And the only thing I'll have to watch is that I turn them as I go and make sure there's not any like tension as I go along, but it should be much easier than cutting them. Okay, well I have to say that I definitely like not cutting the thread and the chain piecing the first time through on the HSTs and just going ahead and feeding them through the sewing machine with that thread still attached. And now I'll just have to cut once. I'll just cut the 2 threads, and I think it actually made it easier, even though you have to make sure you turn them right and that you don't let these being pulling down cause tension on the sewing machine. I found that much easier than picking each HST up again to put it in the sewing machine. So I'll go ahead and cut these that I chain pieced apart, and then I'll move on to cutting them down the line with the rotary cutter, and then we'll be able to press these with the yarn. Now that we have all of our HSTs sewn on both sides of the line, we have to remember after we cut them that we'll press the seams, and then of course once we get all those seams pressed open, we'll cut them all to 2.5 inches, and we'll use our ruler that has the 45-degree line on it to line up on the line where the 2 fabrics meet, and then square them to 2.5 inches. So time to get cutting. So now that I have all the HSTs cut down the middle, I'm going to press them, and the way I'm going to do that is kind of like I did the flying geese. Instead of trying to open all these seams, since there's 192 in total, I plan to just press them like this. I think if I sat here and tried to open all those seams, I'd be here for hours on 192 of them, and I think this will be a much faster way to do it. Okay, so I finished up pressing the HSTs. I've made 64 of each of these combinations of fabrics. You can see here they're all pressed out. So next, according to our instructions, we need to cut these to 2.5-inch squares. As when we cut the pieces were made a little larger so that we'd be able to cut them using our ruler. And again, as always, we'll look for a 45-degree line in our ruler, and we'll line that up where the fabric meets. In the case of this ruler, you'll see like the marks on the halves. On this end, where the diagonal is at with the black diagonal line, I have a 2.5-inch line going both directions. So I can make sure that when I line up the black line on where the fabrics meet in the center, corner to corner, that I still have extra on both sides before I do the cutting. And that way, once I turn the HST around, then I'll have extra to be able to trim off the other side. I also did get this Martelli cutter. I'm really a little bit debating on whether or not this would really work well for this. Maybe if this wasn't here, we have our inserts for the table arriving, the clear inserts of plexiglass, so that we can set the machine down inside the table recess. So right now I have this table extension kind of sticking out. And with this cutter, because of the way it's designed, if you were going to cut these HSTs, you'd have to turn like this. I'm thinking that while I have this here, it may not be very ergonomical to use for this action. It might be better on, cuts going straight this way. But I'll try it just to see how it goes. But I'm pretty sure it's going to be a little awkward. Yeah, I think you could use it. I use it on a few sample pieces of fabric, some scraps, but I haven't really used it to cut anything out yet. And so, I mean, it cuts fine. It's probably just me getting used to the feel of, because as you know, if you've used one of these, it's a lot different holding something you're trying to, like this, that you're trying to hold against the edge of a ruler and also push straight and stay against the ruler as you go. So, it's just probably going to take a little bit of getting used to. But I think, though, like I said, since I can't really turn it this way, because then I couldn't cut this and that. So turning it this way, I feel like for this, it won't be the most easy to use with this table extension sticking out. But once I have this machine set down in the table, I think this would be even handier. But I'll stick with this for now on these HSTs. Okay, so there's one. So I'll continue on and get my HSTs cut out, and this will take a while. With 192 total, I don't know. I'm guessing it's probably something that would take an hour, but I'm not really sure. I haven't really timed doing this before with any of the others that I've cut out. I finished cutting my 192 HST squares to 2.5 inches, and now I have all of those here laid in front of me along with the solid black, which is fabric piece P. I've laid out one of the hunter stars here as the diagram shows in our instructions on page 6. So now it's time to get sewing, and of course one of the things we'll have to pay close attention to with so many different HSTs coming together with the points and the different colors, we need to make sure that our sewing is precise so that we don't end up with things out of alignment within the block. So it's time to get sewing, and what I'm going to do is I'm probably just going to take 2 blocks from each row at a time and put them face to face, and then I'll start with those blocks to sew those, and then I'll continue on to the next row, and we'll just go through and do all of our 16 hunter star. I'm just going to go through and cut these apart so that I can then go through and sew the two sets of two pieces together to form each row. So for each row, I now have two blocks joined together, and I'll join all those sets of two to form an entire row. So I'm going to go on and sew these together. Okay, so I chain pieced all my rows together. So now I'm going to cut these apart, and then I'll press out these seams so that I can start sewing some of the rows together in pairs. For the hunter star, I have joined all the pieces together for these blocks for each of the rows inside the block. So there are 4 for each block. And now we just need to join our rows together to form the blocks, then press those seams out. And since I've been doing these in sets, I have all 16 of them stacked up here. So I'm gonna go ahead and start joining those together. Hopefully we can get these hunter star blocks completed soon. With my hunter star blocks, I've joined the first and second and third and fourth rows together. I'm going to press the seams open just to make it a little easier to deal with, going through here to join the second and third rows together because, you could do it without pressing the seams on these and then do all 3 seams at the last, but I think it'll lay a little nicer and be easier to deal with going through the sewing machine like that. Okay, so I pressed out the seams on my top and bottom halves of the hunter star block, and now it's time to join these together to wrap up these blocks. I finished joining the top and bottom half of my blocks. I'm going to cut apart these blocks that I chain pieced, and then I'm going to press them. So in addition to pressing the seams on the back, I'm also going to starch these blocks just a little bit and then iron them out flat, because as we know, when we sew this fabric together, it's not a rigid material, right? So it's going to wrinkle a little and bunch up a little. And this way, when we trim the corners of our block, from corner to corner to trim these ravelings off, we'll know that we're trimming it as it's pressed flat and not while it's laying kind of like in a wrinkled state. And of course, with this trimming, we will be careful because we don't want to trim off the points of our star, because with our 1/4 inch seam allowance, when that sews to the next portion of the quilt, we want those points to end up right at the seam, right? So I was just trimming off the ravelings on each of the 4 sides by lining the ruler up corner to corner and trimming, what was sticking out from there. So I'll do the same for all the rest of the blocks, and I'll have these hunter star blocks completed, and then I'll be able to move on to assembling the overall quilt. Well, I hope you enjoyed accompanying me for this part of the sew along for the Astro Journey quilt pattern and making the Hunter Star blocks for the quilt. There's 16 of them, and I'm glad to get those done, all those HSTs. In the next part of the series, I'm going to move on to page 7. And page 7 starts talking about assembling the quilt and one of the first steps involved in that. So I hope you can join me for the next video in this series. I'm also hoping that you took on the challenge of making this quilt, and I'd love to see your finishes and hear about them. If you have suggestions and comments, not only for myself and others, please post those. And if you enjoyed the video, give me a thumbs up. And if you haven't subscribed to my channel and you enjoy sew-alongs and also receiving free quilt patterns, I encourage you to subscribe to my channel. And in the meantime, I'm wishing you happy sewing and beautiful finishes.